Many people might think feeding animals is just a matter of buying bagged feed and dishing it out every day, but the Amish seem to have cracked a code that keeps them from wasting money this way. Imagine spending nearly $0 to feed your animals, all while keeping them happier and healthier. This approach not only saves cash, but also gets animals eating what they'd naturally find if left to their own devices. Growing up, I remember my grandfather always saying, "Animals are only as healthy as what they eat." Turns out he was right. We tend to feed them from packages, while the Amish stick to nature's pantry. Quite the smart move, really. The Amish don't just rely on nature because it's old-fashioned, they do it because it works. Let's see how we Amish feed their animals without wasting any money. Chickens might be the closest thing to natural recyclers on a farm. They'll happily peck away at just about anything, saving you money and cutting down on waste. Amish farmers know that chickens are born foragers, so they're often allowed to roam freely, scratching through dirt and grass to find all sorts of tasty morsels. They munch on bugs, seeds, and plants, turning an open patch of land into a constant buffet. It's like giving them an endless salad bar with added protein in the form of worms and insects, which are high in nutrients and perfect for a healthy chicken diet. Chickens are surprisingly resourceful. Turn them loose in a garden, and they'll go after pests faster than any commercial bug spray, while also adding some rich, natural fertilizer back into the soil as they go. The Amish approach keeps the birds both physically active and mentally engaged. Commercial feeds might make sense in some settings, but these natural snacks are fresher, more nutritious, and come with no price tag attached. Just don't go throwing everything at them. Chickens, despite their strong stomachs, can't handle everything we eat. Raw potatoes, chocolate, avocado, and onions can cause serious harm. You'd be amazed at how much chickens can gobble down safely, but keeping these few foods off the menu is a must. And let's be real, chickens don't need the fancy leftovers from our plates. They're content with whatever clean scraps and garden extras come their way. One of the funny things about chickens is how they'll dive into anything that's thrown their way. I've seen chickens fight over a crust of bread as if it were a grand prize, and nothing gets their attention quite like an unexpected pile of scraps. But they do a better job than a compost bin in reducing waste, and you'll save a fair amount on store-bought feed along the way. The next time you toss out scraps, remember that chickens might be eyeing those bits as the main course. Just skip the onions and chocolate and let them go to town. While chickens forage and recycle food scraps, rabbits bring another dimension to waste reduction and garden upkeep. Rabbits are another win for Amish homesteaders, especially because they're content with what the garden already offers. These little guys have no problem munching away on garden trimmings, clippings, and even a few weeds. To them, it's a buffet straight from nature, and it's incredibly cost-effective. Amish families don't have to buy fancy rabbit pellets. Instead, they feed them odds and ends from garden maintenance. That lettuce you toss, that's a whole meal for a rabbit. Although, let's not include iceberg lettuce here, which has little nutritional value and can upset their digestion. Think of rabbits as picky little vegetarians with simple yet refined tastes. They'll gladly eat a variety of greens, but steer clear of anything too rich or harmful, like garlic, onions, and especially rhubarb leaves. Rhubarb is basically a big no thank you in the rabbit world, as it can be downright toxic for them. As for the rest of the garden, rabbits will hop around happily, finding the best bites without making you buy extra feed. And because they aren't as voracious as other animals, they're like those dinner dates that never order the most expensive thing on the menu. Rabbits also happen to produce excellent natural fertilizer in the form of bunny berries. Yes, droppings, which is a bonus for garden growth. So you're essentially getting free lawn care along with natural manure that can go straight to the plants. The Amish lean into this natural cycle where rabbits eat from the garden, fertilize it in return, and keep the food bill at zero. And the best part? They keep multiplying. Rabbits can provide additional meat or pets without adding to your feed expenses. Just as rabbits help clear garden trimmings, barn cats add their own efficiency, working tirelessly to keep pests in check. When it comes to feeding animals on the homestead, barn cats have got it all figured out. These little critters earn their keep by hunting down mice, rats, and any other pests that dare to invade your barn. And guess what? Amish families don't need to buy them fancy food when they're doing such a great job of keeping the place rodent-free. You could say that barn cats work for their meals, Whether it's mice, voles, or the occasional bird, they're always on the lookout for their next catch. Of course, when they're not out hunting, they'll still munch on the occasional leftovers or scraps, but they're not dependent on it. Barn cats, in many ways, are like those rugged, independent types who would rather catch their dinner than sit at the table waiting for a meal to be served. But don't go thinking you can toss them any old thing from the kitchen. There are a few foods that should never make it to your cat's bowl, like chocolate, grapes, garlic, onions, and unfortunately, dairy. While you may think a little milk would be a treat for them, it can upset their stomachs. Amish farmers know that these cats have a sweet deal going on, catching pests and getting a few scraps in return, but they certainly don't break the bank on cat food. It's all part of the homesteading efficiency. Even your pets are contributing to the cause. You could say the cats are earning their supper, and by doing so, they cut down on your food expenses and keep your home clear of pesky critters. I have a few barn cats of my own, and I can tell you that they really take their job seriously. They'll catch a mouse before I can even think about getting the trap set. It's almost like they're in a competition to see who can catch the most before bedtime. Not to brag, but they are the most reliable pest control I've got. And honestly, they don't seem to mind a bit. The Amish probably have it right. Let your animals do the hard work while you save the money. Cats handle the smaller intruders, but when it comes to protection, the only product we'll ever promote on our channel is a book by Claude Davis, a veteran prepper, about 126 superfoods and preservation methods from crisis times like the Great Depression and wartime that are impossible to find elsewhere. We decided to promote his book because we are the last generation able to share these techniques and superfoods to our children or grandchildren. It would be a shame to see this information about highly nutritious foods and preservation methods to survive crises disappear. You can also find a book about herbal remedies from Nicole Apelian on their store. If you're watching this on TV, you can look up our channel, Frugal Solutions, on your phone or tablet and find the books by clicking the link in our channel description or any other video description. Dogs bring their own strengths to the farm. Amish dogs have a different kind of life compared to pampered pooches you might find in suburban homes. These dogs are true working animals tasked with guarding the property and watching over livestock, and they don't need a fancy bag of kibble to do it. Instead, they often live off of scraps from the kitchen and sometimes the occasional leftover meat from the homestead. Talk about low maintenance. It's a simple, practical approach that keeps their bellies full without breaking the bank. These dogs are experts at turning leftover vegetables, breads, and the odd slice of meat into energy for a day's work. The real genius of this system is in how dogs naturally help reduce waste. If there's one thing dogs love, it's food, and they'll happily scarf down leftovers that we might toss in the compost bin. And let's be honest, they're not picky. Whether it's a half-eaten sandwich or the last bite of a stew, dogs are usually thrilled to finish what we don't want. This arrangement saves Amish farmers a small fortune on dog food. And let's face it, those dogs sure earn it with their security duties. But of course, like with every animal, there are a few foods that are no-goes for dogs. You wouldn't want to accidentally feed them grapes, chocolate, onions, or macadamia nuts, all of which can be harmful to them. Fortunately, most homesteaders know what's safe for their dogs and are great at giving them what's both nutritious and safe. After all, the Amish are all about making sure their animals thrive, so their dogs get the occasional homemade stew, but it's never at the expense of their health. It's almost like having a dog that doubles as both a protector and a personal garbage disposal. They're getting fed from scraps and still looking sharp enough to scare off any intruders. I'm not saying my own dogs are security experts, but they sure know how to make sure no piece of food goes uneaten. Sometimes I think they'd prefer to guard the kitchen rather than the barn if it meant more snacks. But hey, if it saves me some money on dog food while also keeping the place safe, I'll call that a win. As guardians of the property, dogs hold their own. But when it's time to clear overgrown brush, goats become invaluable. Goats are the original landscapers, and they charge nothing. Amish farmers rely on these furry, four-legged munchers to clear overgrown pastures, weeds, and brush without spending a dime on feed. Goats will eat anything, from thorny bushes to weeds you've been trying to get rid of for years, and they're not shy about it either. I've seen goats sample everything in sight, including plants you'd swear were strictly ornamental. They even seem to have a special talent for sniffing out the best weeds. It's as though they've figured out the fine art of grazing with a purpose. cutting down on costs while keeping their environment in check. Now, as with all animals, goats have their dietary limits. While they love their free meals, you have to be careful with what they nibble. Certain plants like tomato and potato plants, azaleas, and rhododendrons can be toxic, so it's a good idea to keep a watchful eye on their browsing habits. One thing I've learned is that goats can often be found munching on something that might look harmless, but is actually a no-go for them. It's a bit like leaving your toddler alone with a bowl of candy. Sometimes they just can't resist, but you've got to step in before things go south. Goats may not be the most refined eaters, but their ability to transform your overgrown property into a neatly trimmed landscape, all while eating almost anything that grows, is impressive. And they do it all without charging a dime in feed costs. As they're working hard to clear your brush and keep their bellies full, I can't help but imagine them thinking, "This is the life, grazing freely while cutting down your expenses." Goats may take care of the roughage, but cows provide a different kind of efficiency, especially in grazing pastures. Cows, those big, beautiful creatures, are some of the most cost-effective animals to feed on a homestead, especially if you're following Amish methods. The Amish use rotational grazing for their cows, which means moving them from one pasture to another to give the grass time to grow back. This method reduces the need for grain and hay, two things that can quickly drive up costs. Instead of spending your hard-earned cash on bags of feed, you let the cows munch on the lush green grass growing right in front of them. It's like giving them an all-you-can-eat salad bar with a side of fresh air. Now, while cows are the champions of grazing, you have to keep them away from certain plants. Nightshade, ornamental shrubs, and rhubarb can cause all kinds of problems. I once saw a cow get into a patch of rhubarb, and let's just say it wasn't pretty. It's like when you leave a toddler alone with a bag of chips, things can get messy and not in a good way. But when they stick to grass, cows are basically the homesteading equivalent of a lawnmower on autopilot. They'll keep your property neatly trimmed without the need for expensive machinery, all while keeping your feed bill down. Sometimes I joke that cows are like the ultimate multitaskers. They mow the lawn for free, fertilize the soil, and even offer the occasional milk to sweeten the deal. The only thing they ask for in return is some fresh, tasty grass and a little bit of space to roam. And as anyone who's ever had cows will tell you, they're more than happy to wander from one patch of grass to the next, as though they've been trained to migrate to the best-tasting grass. It's a full-time job for them, and they're always on the move. While cows keep the pastures trimmed, pigs tackle a different task, using scraps and waste to reduce feed costs. When it comes to feeding pigs, the Amish have mastered the art of waste reduction. Rather than spending money on expensive commercial feeds, they turn to leftover food scraps, organic matter, and garden waste to keep their pigs happy. Pigs are nature's recyclers. Nothing goes to waste around these guys. From yesterday's leftover dinner to the overripe apples that didn't make it to market, pigs will happily gobble it all down like they're on a food-eating contest. And while they'll eat nearly anything, it's important to know what not to feed them. For example, avocado, raw beans, and unripe potatoes are all a no-go. Trust me, one time we gave our pigs some raw beans, and let's just say they weren't happy campers. It's like when you try to save a few bucks at the grocery store and end up with something weird and inedible. Lesson learned. Pigs, however, are pretty happy with the scraps that are safe for them, and they don't seem to mind the weird mix of leftovers they get. I've watched them devour the scraps like they were at an all-you-can-eat buffet. You could say pigs are the compost bins of the animal world. They clean up whatever you don't want, and they do it with enthusiasm. It's almost like they have a sense of humor about it. Free food? Yes, please. They're the ultimate recycling team, transforming waste into nourishment and helping to reduce the amount of food waste on the farm. Pigs make use of food waste, but ducks contribute by naturally controlling pests around the farm. Ducks are another example of how the Amish use animals to handle more than just feeding themselves. They're natural bug catchers, and if you let them roam, they'll happily munch on pests, weeds, and even some unwanted garden produce. Amish farms tend to let ducks roam freely, knowing that while they're snacking on bugs, they're also cutting down on the need for feed. Ducks are like nature's pest control team. They're out there doing the job without any chemicals or sprays, just their insatiable appetites for a good bug. But don't be fooled. They're not all about free labor. Ducks do need to eat, and while they're naturally foragers, they also have some dietary preferences to keep in mind. Bread, spinach, citrus, and onions, those are on the not safe list. It's like feeding your dog chocolate. It just doesn't end well. I once tossed my ducks some leftover bread thinking they'd love it. They gave me a look like I was offering them the worst treat ever, and I was left wondering if I had violated some duck culinary code. They prefer a diet with a little more variety, like insects, weeds, and the occasional bit of grain. In the end, ducks end up doing double duty. They provide a little free pest control while also lowering your feed bill. And they don't mind a little payment in the form of some bugs, a few weeds, and whatever leftovers you can spare. Honestly, I'm convinced they're laughing at us. Here we are, buying expensive pest control products while they're just out there doing their thing, getting their payment in the form of nature's free meals. If ducks were humans, they'd probably be working part-time jobs just for fun, leaving us all to wonder how they're getting by without a paycheck. Ducks may manage pests, but food banks open up a new avenue of affordable, sustainable feeding options. Food banks aren't just for humans, at least not entirely. In fact, they can be a goldmine for homesteaders looking to feed their animals on the cheap. Amish farmers often get creative by visiting food banks, especially those that have leftover or expired items that are still perfectly fine for animals. And let's face it, food banks are full of things we'd never use, like old bread, overripe fruits, and even the occasional batch of untouched vegetables that didn't make it to a supermarket shelf. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that not all food is safe for your animals. Chocolate, spicy foods, or anything with added sugars or salt are definitely a no-go, but there's still plenty of good stuff to be had. I've personally found that my chickens absolutely love expired veggies, and I swear they think they're getting some gourmet meal when they get a mix of lettuce or carrots that are a little past their prime. Sometimes it feels like the animals know exactly where the best meals come from. They'll line up at the food bank discarded leftovers like they're waiting at a restaurant. If you've ever tossed some banana peels or wilting veggies to your ducks or pigs, you know how quickly they swoop in as if it's the most exciting thing they've had all day. It's like they've hit the jackpot. These food banks are their version of an all-you-can-eat buffet. Food banks can also provide a variety of food scraps that, with a little sorting, can keep feed costs down and make your animals pretty happy. And who doesn't want to reduce waste while also making sure your critters are getting a little extra love in their diet? You just have to be smart about what you take and keep an eye on anything that might not be animal friendly. It's a win-win for everyone, especially your wallet. Food banks are a helpful resource, but even kitchen scraps can become a valuable source of nutrition for the animals. Kitchen scraps, yeah, the stuff you probably throw away, can be a real treasure when it comes to feeding your animals for next to nothing. I've learned firsthand how much my chickens, pigs, and goats appreciate leftovers that would otherwise end up in the trash. Whether it's the half-eaten toast from breakfast or the carrot peels from dinner prep, your scraps can be a lifesaver for your animals. The Amish are great at this too, and it's a key part of how they keep their feed bills low. The trick is knowing what to avoid, of course. No chocolate, avocado, or anything too processed or spicy. Stick with the basics: vegetable scraps, stale bread, or some leftover rice, and you're in business. I've had a few mornings where I woke up and found my chickens already busy pecking at some leftover grits or oatmeal. It's like they had their own secret breakfast club. And let's not forget how fun it is to watch the animals devour a meal they didn't have to work for, especially when it's something like a bowl of mashed potatoes that didn't make it to the dinner table. It's like a feast for them, and it's a win for your wallet. The pigs, in particular, seem to think they're at an all-you-can-eat buffet. They'll take whatever scraps you throw at them without question. The best part? You're not only saving money on animal feed, but you're also cutting down on waste. It's like a recycling program, except the recycling is a little more spirited. It's an easy habit to get into, and soon enough, you'll wonder why you ever paid for expensive feed in the first place. Leftovers and kitchen scraps can reduce costs, but growing your own feed can take self-sufficiency to a new level. One of the best ways to cut down on feed costs is by growing your own animal food. The Amish know this well. They aren't running out to buy fancy bags of feed for their animals. Instead, they grow crops like corn, alfalfa, and soybeans right on their property. And the beauty of it? It's simple, it's sustainable, and it saves you a boatload of cash. I've started growing a bit of corn myself, and let me tell you, watching the animals munch on something you grew with your own hands feels pretty rewarding. It's not like you need acres of land either. Even on a smaller plot, you can grow a lot of feed. Alfalfa is a great choice for goats, cows, and rabbits. Super nutritious and easy to grow. Plus, it can double as hay in the winter months, so it works year-round. Soybeans are another solid choice. They're packed with protein, making them perfect for pigs or chickens. Just a small area in the garden, and you've got a natural, cost-effective food source. But while you're getting your hands dirty with these crops, remember to keep animals away from plants that aren't on the menu. Nightshades, for example, are a no-go for many animals. I once had a goat nibble on some tomato plants and learned the hard way that not everything growing in the garden is meant for grazing. Goats, in particular, will eat just about anything. They're like the toddlers of the animal world, testing boundaries left and right. The best part of growing your own feed, though, is that you don't have to wait for harvest time to start saving. The animals can nibble on things like clover or dandelions. Yep, those pesky weeds, which are packed with nutrients and cost absolutely nothing. A little gardening effort, and you can have a free-for-all grazing party right in your backyard. Homegrown feed is sustainable, but rotational grazing maximizes pasture usage and lets animals enjoy fresh grass. Rotational grazing is one of those techniques that sounds fancy, but is really just a matter of smart management, something the Amish have been doing for years. It's simple. Rather than letting animals graze one patch of land down to the dirt, you rotate them between different sections of pasture. This way, the grass can regenerate in the areas that have been rested, and the animals still get a fresh, tasty patch to graze every time. It's like a game of musical chairs, but for cows and goats. You just have to make sure the grass has a chance to recover before letting the animals back onto it. I've found that when you manage your pasture this way, it cuts down on the need for expensive feed like hay or grain. Those cows are happy munching away on fresh grass, and I'm happy watching my feed bill shrink. When cows and goats are rotated through different sections, they'll always have something fresh to nibble, and you won't be running out to buy extra hay for the winter. I've even seen cows act like they're on a mission when they move to the next section of pasture. There's a certain pride in watching them migrate from one patch to another, like they're making their own little parade across the farm. And don't forget the goats. Those little guys will graze on just about anything, so rotational grazing is perfect for them too. With proper pasture management, you'll soon find that your need to supplement with store-bought feed will be cut way down. All it takes is a bit of planning and an eye on the grass, and you've got yourself a low-cost, sustainable system that's a win-win for both the animals and your wallet. While rotational grazing keeps animals in fresh pastures, foraging lets them find seasonal treats in the wild. Foraging for free food to feed your animals is something that not only saves money, but also gives your animals a fresh variety in their diets. Amish farmers know that depending on the season, the wild world offers up an abundance of treats for their animals, and the best part is, it's often free for the taking. Whether it's early spring with tender dandelion greens or late fall with fallen apples, animals love a little seasonal snack. In the spring, many pastures and fields are bursting with fresh greens. Some of these may even be weeds that you might otherwise pull up in frustration, but guess what? Goats and chickens are fans of them. Summer brings its own bounty with everything from wild berries to clover, perfect for grazing animals. In the fall, you might find windfall apples or overripe pumpkins that pigs and ducks find irresistible. It's like nature's version of a grocery store, only without the long checkout line and price tags. However, foraging isn't as simple as letting the animals loose to pick whatever they want. Not every wild plant is good for them. Animals can easily munch on some toxic mushrooms or other plants that would make them sick if you're not careful. And there are the plants that even the Amish avoid giving to their animals, like wild garlic or plants in the nightshade family. Trust me, I've learned the hard way to double-check before offering up any wild goodies. But if you know what to look for, it's amazing how much free food is out there. I've seen ducks waddling around like they've hit the jackpot when they find a juicy bug or worm. It's almost as if they know they're getting their meal of the day without any effort at all. And even my chickens get excited when they get fresh greens, scratching at the ground like they've just discovered a hidden treasure chest. What's really fun is that the animals don't even know they're doing you a favor by foraging. They're happy to grocery shop without using any of your time or money. It's a great way to cut feed costs and keep your animals healthy with a natural, varied diet. Just make sure to keep a close eye on what they're eating, because nature isn't always as straightforward as it seems. Foraging supplies a variety, but partnerships with local businesses provide even more resources to cut costs. One clever trick Amish farmers use to feed their animals for next to nothing is forming relationships with local businesses. While they're known for their resourcefulness, the Amish have a knack for asking the right people for scraps. Local grocery stores, restaurants, and bakeries often have leftover food that's perfectly safe for animals but would otherwise go to waste. A few years ago, I struck up a deal with a nearby bakery. Every morning, they'd have some old loaves of bread ready for me to pick up. The chickens loved it. Free food, and I didn't even have to do much other than drive a few minutes. It felt a little too easy, but that's the beauty of working smart, not hard. Building these relationships isn't just about asking for handouts, though. It's about finding a solution to a problem they might have. Many businesses need to get rid of scraps fast, and rather than just tossing it, they're happy to give it away to someone who will make good use of it. The trick is making sure they're not giving you anything that could be harmful, like food that's too processed or has spices. I learned quickly not to accept any leftover food with too much sugar or anything that could upset the animals' digestive systems. A few months ago, I managed to strike up another deal with a local restaurant. They had an excess of vegetable trimmings and leftover greens, which became an amazing source of food for my rabbits. It wasn't quite like gourmet dining for the bunnies, but they didn't seem to mind. Probably because they were getting to eat out for free. Just be sure to ask about the specifics of what they're offering, because some foods, like highly spiced items or processed leftovers, might not sit well with your animals. And before you know it, you'll be known in your community as the person who picks up all the leftover scraps. It's not the most glamorous job, but when you see your animals happily munching on free food, it sure feels like you've cracked the code on a homesteader's dream. Plus, it helps reduce food waste, which is always a win in my book. I can't tell you how many times I found myself reflecting on the Amish way of doing things. Last spring, I was working on my own homestead, trying to figure out how to cut back on feed costs. Between the garden, the scraps, and a little help from the local food bank, I realized that my animals were eating better than I was, and they weren't costing me a thing. My goats were munching through the weeds in the yard, the chickens were foraging like pros, and even the ducks were earning their keep by chasing down bugs. The best part? I wasn't stressing over a stack of feed bills at the end of the month. It took some trial and error, of course, but embracing the Amish philosophy has been one of the most rewarding things I've done. The sense of self-sufficiency that comes with not relying on store-bought feed is priceless. And let's not forget the environmental benefits. By reducing waste, reusing scraps, and letting animals forage naturally, I'm not just saving money. I'm helping the planet too. Every bit of food that goes to an animal instead of the landfill is a small victory. If you want to live like the Amish, it's not about mimicking every little thing they do, but about adopting that mindset of making the most of what you have and thinking outside the box. Who knew that feeding animals could be this simple and sustainable?